Hi, Ross Cabot in the Cobb TV studios again with Chairman Mike Boyce. And how you doing?
Well, here we are coming up on Easter weekend.
Yeah.
So it's for those of us of our Christian faith, it's a very special time for us. But it's also a very special week in Cobb County. We had another board meeting last night. And we had a number of interesting topics that came up, and once again, showing the board at work.
And even as we sit here, the legislature down in Atlanta has sine die tomorrow. And how difficult is it to keep up, especially in these last few days, with topics that impact Cobb County?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's an educational format. Does anybody know what sine die means? Actually, it's a Latin term for meaning without a day. So here you are. For all our watchers, we've learned something new today. You know, this has been a real education for me. This is the first year where I've had to really work a lot with the delegation. And also, I have been working in the past with some of our surrounding county chairmen and chairwomen. But the transit legislation was one where all these pieces had to come together. And right now, even as I speak, I've been speaking to members of both the Senate and the House side of our Georgia delegation. And apparently there's a compromise language where Cobb will be in the legislation. It very specifically addresses the need for a referendum on the projects. I'm a little hesitant to talk about what the language is because there's still a number of hours left where things can change. But the bottom line is that we have been working closely with our delegation, and I think that our concerns have been addressed in there. It's a compromise, but I think then again, you know, going back to the days of James Madison, if you want to get government to work, you have to compromise. You don't compromise your principles, but you compromise on what you can get into legislation where you allow it to move forward. And this is a great example of, at the start of this, the delegation had a number of questions and concerns. By our actions working with the chamber and other business communities and members of Cobb County, we've been able to convince them that this legislation will in fact move Cobb forward. It sends the message to the business community that we want to be part of this regional network, but we do it in a way that allows us to take any kind of project list to a referendum, which goes back to my commitment that we're not going to do any kind of large purchase or buy into a program of this magnitude without going to the voters.
You mentioned despite some significant challenges, there was a real thought that this is the year that something needed to be done.
That's right. I get a sense, the nice thing about a controversial issue like this is it brings people to the table to talk about it. And it's a very informal table because the table includes emails, texts, phone calls, meetings. And this one issue here, I think we had enough time to get a sense that whatever happened in the past involving transit, we've moved on to that. There's still always going to be some opposition to doing transit because of the fact that we're using a lot of county money to do it, which is why the referendum is so important. And to reassure the taxpayer that nothing of this magnitude will be brought into play without a referendum, at least not while I'm the chairman. But we have to do something about the traffic and getting people to and from wherever they want. And I'm not just talking for economic development, I'm talking about mobility. I was looking at a transportation map yesterday that showed us where our major traffic patterns were. And I think that the map itself will argue why we need to have transit throughout the county and not just in the existing areas in South Cobb and along the 75 corridor. There was a striking example of Stylesboro Road, which is, you know, those who use that road every day, and I did during the campaign, but fortunately I was going in the opposite direction, but I could certainly see the long line of traffic waiting to get by there. There's arguments there that both for transit and for transportation-related issues, grade separations, get people through the choke points, which are the traffic lights. So all this is coming together, and again, I also want to emphasize that the transit study, which was criticized last year heavily by some, is coming into play at the exact right moment, because now we're going to have numbers to substantiate the kind of projects that we want to take forward next year in the transportation category, and it'll be based on facts and not opinion.
I remember the transit study, if I remember, mostly federally funded. And what is it doing? What is it looking at?
Well, it's doing a number of things, and quite honestly, it was also funded by SPLOST. All right, I think to the tune of about $640,000. It's going to do a number. First, it's going to relook at all our traffic, our transit routes. Are we, in fact, using the buses in the manner in which we bought them for? The buses were, in fact, bought with federal dollars, and we have to use those buses for a certain length of time and for a certain number of miles before we can turn them back to the federal government. Otherwise, we have to pay them back for the full amount. So we're stuck with the buses. The buses aren't going anywhere. They're also going to see if perhaps there might be need for new routes in the county. They're going to be looking at other transit and transportation-related issues to see how we can move people around the county. So we had our first public meeting last night, and we'll have several of them in the future to start putting together something that we'll have by the fall. And this is going to be great because I think one of the aspects of the new legislation is that we're going to have a committee, a joint committee of the delegation and the board coming up with a transit list that we'll agree on, that we'll take to the voters in referendum in 2019. And this study is going to be able to give us factually based ideas of what it is we need to do in the future.
Right. We had a commission meeting this week in which something very exciting happened. We have a master plan for a 103-acre park down in part of the county that's undergoing some rapid change. I think it's a very exciting park, but we also had an issue with what that park should be named.
Yeah, sure. You know, it was a great meeting, in the sense of there were a lot of people, again, who came to talk about the issue. And you learn, you know, as I keep telling people, I could sit up in my office on the 3rd floor and do a lot of good things every time, but you're filtered from seeing reality. And last night, there were some really great comments made about the importance of attaching the name of this park with a community that envelops it. And I heard a couple things last night that, okay, I see what they're doing now. So what we're trying to do right now is we approved the master plan for the park. The park was acquired almost 30 years ago in a court action. So we got that part of it. But then we, in the 2016 SPLOST, designated $1 million to help provide some kind of trail system and some signage to indicate this historical area. And the issue last night that was unresolved is what we would name this park. So the commissioner very wisely split the motion, the agenda item, in 2 parts. We passed the master plan, and we're going to come back in a future board and in a future board, but a near future board, to give that the name. I think it's going to give the park a definite root in the community, which is what they're arguing for last night in the people who attended. Right,
and talking to you and some of the other commissioners, I mean, there seems to be a wide consensus that there's room for compromise.
Yes, there is, and I tell everybody, James Madison, you know, the way you have efficient government is by compromise. Doesn't mean, again, you don't compromise your principles, but you do compromise on how to move something forward. And as I tell people, I have 3 speeds when I try to govern: 5-0, 4-1, and 3-2. So last night the commissioner sensed that she didn't have the necessary votes to pass it on the name. So she did what's a very smart thing to do, which is, all right, let's go back and look at this to see what I can do in conjunction with the community and the board to find a compromise on a name that will move this project forward.
You found yourself watching that on the sidelines.
I did. I recused myself. I'm very active in the community, as you know, before I was elected, and one of the groups that I supported was one of the parties involved in the dispute and the discussion about the naming of the park. And I'd made a sizable contribution last year, and I just thought that once you have to go on the defensive about making that kind of contribution and also being engaged in the discussion, you lose the argument. So I thought it was best in everybody's interest, as a potential conflict of interest, to recuse myself from the issue. But Commissioner Cooper did a great job in handling it.
Right. You also wanted to point out during our talk today, we're in a very challenging environment when it comes to public safety and attracting people to become police officers and that sort of thing, but we're continuing to move forward on that.
We are. Yeah, we've done a number of things. I'll start again with a pay study last year. What we did for the pay studies, we didn't give everybody pay raises. That's not what it was all about. It was about to bring a certain number of people in the county, whether they were county staff or work for an elected official or constitutional officer, to bring their compensation up to make it competitive with the market. And out of the 2,400 members of those who received additional compensation, 1,200 of them worked in public safety. So that was our first big step to matching our mouth with our deeds. This year, although I supported the idea of doing it, I didn't support the way we did it, but we did in fact address some of the inequities of the pay study by increasing the compensation or adjusting the compensation for police and sheriff, sergeants and lieutenants. And then last night we also used some funds to hire 7 additional people in the 911 communications center, plus a new supervisor. And I think it's really important to emphasize that to me, the 911 is the linchpin for all our public safety, because every single phone call goes to 911. You're not calling your patrolman on his beat with a cell phone. You have to go through 911. And if everyone who's ever made a tour of that very complicated facility understands why it takes 18 months to train somebody to do their job right. And as I do ride-alongs with the police, I'm always amazed as I'm hearing, it's like background chatter. Like when I was a pilot, you'd hear transmissions to other aircraft. You just sort of tune into what your call sign is. The police do the same thing by their car number. But these 911 operators, they're amazing how they can direct people and sort information out. So again, we needed to get a head start on this, and I can assure you that next year in the 2019 budget, we will continue to add resources to our public safety.
You talk about 911. I remember visiting that facility 20 years ago. Our population has increased so much, but the calls coming into that center increased proportionately to that.
They have, but probably even more so because we made it very clear to the public. If you see something, say something. And if you have a concern of any kind involving public safety, call 911, and that message has gotten out. So the volume of traffic actually is probably higher in a proportion than our population increase. But my hat's off to these men and women at that center, and we're doing all we can to give them all the support they need.
And lastly, quickly moving forward, we talked about the challenges in the past about finding parkland property in this county to fulfill the parks bond that we issued, but we're making progress.
We did. We acquired 2 more, we closed on 2 more properties yesterday in District 1, and I'm really pleased to see these 2 properties are buttoned up against properties that the county already has, so they're going to be able to extend our trail system. It's a very competitive market because of, if not the main reason, certainly one of the main reasons of the raised development. And it has created this halo effect throughout the county. So we're having a very difficult time giving our money to buy land because we can only acquire property at the appraised value, not the market level. But I cannot say enough for the citizens who have taken that offer at the appraised value, and the properties we've been getting have really been magnificent. So I think we're up to $16 million out of the $27 million that we're allowed to spend, and we have a couple more coming back on the books. So I'm confident that we'll meet our deadline of having to spend this money by, I believe, 2019.
All righty. Well, thanks for coming by. As always, if you want to keep track on everything going on through the chairman and the county, follow us on Facebook and Twitter and our social media outlets as well. Sign up for newsletters, and we will be back this week with more with Chairman Mike Boyce.
Okay, and happy Easter to everybody.